When we first started the show, I really thought we were doing a show about building cars and motorcycles for people. It evolved into a show about people and their story. It really brought challenges in the early days.
For more than a decade, Danny Koker has welcomed millions of viewers into the world of Counts Customs, the Las Vegas garage where classic muscle cars, choppers, and forgotten relics get a second life. On screen, the shop looks like one big family, wrenches turning, engines roaring, and Danny cracking jokes while he inspects a fresh paint job. But like any long-running business built on trust, cash, and high-pressure deadlines, not everyone who walked through those garage doors left on good terms. Over the years, a handful of names have become associated with lawsuits, quiet disappearances, and behind-the-scenes tension that never made it into the final cut. This is the story of Danny Koker's rise, the reality of running a shop under constant camera exposure, and the 5 former employees whose exits left the biggest mark on Counting Cars history. Danny Koker's love of cars didn't start in a television studio. It started in Michigan. Though he was born in Cleveland, Ohio, Danny spent much of his childhood in Detroit, a city practically built around the automobile industry. Growing up surrounded by muscle cars and weekend car shows gave him an early, almost unavoidable education in engines, bodywork, and the culture that surrounds American classics. It wasn't a hobby he picked up later in life. It was simply part of the environment he was raised in. His father, Danny Koker Sr., shaped him in 2 very different ways. As a musician who performed with respected gospel groups, he filled the household with music, and that influence would eventually lead Danny into his own entertainment career. But Koker Sr. was also a car enthusiast, and that passion transferred directly to his son. By his teenage years, Danny was already spending far more time under the hood of an old vehicle than he was doing anything else. While other kids his age were focused on typical teenage pursuits, Danny was teaching himself how to restore hot rods, tune engines, and bring dead machines back to life. That early fascination with rebuilding cars followed him into adulthood, but it would take a detour through show business before it turned into a television empire. In the early 1990s, Danny relocated to Las Vegas, a city that offered opportunities in both of his interests, cars and entertainment. He carved out a local following as a late-night television host, playing an exaggerated, theatrical vampire rocker character who introduced classic horror films to viewers after dark. It was campy, deliberately over the top, and it turned him into a recognizable face in the Las Vegas entertainment scene long before Counting Cars existed. Even while building a name for himself on local television, Danny never stepped away from cars. He opened a small workshop, originally intended just to maintain and modify vehicles from his personal collection. Word about his builds began to spread through Las Vegas, first among collectors and car enthusiasts, then among a broader audience who appreciated his willingness to break from convention. He wasn't interested in producing safe, predictable restorations. His builds combined respect for old-school engineering with bold, sometimes rebellious design choices, aggressive paint schemes, lowered stances, and engines tuned for both sound and performance. That reputation eventually turned his personal shop into a full-fledged custom business, Counts Customs. Running a shop in a city like Las Vegas came with its own advantages. The city has always attracted collectors, entertainers, and people with disposable income looking for something that couldn't be bought off a dealership lot. Danny understood that market instinctively. He wasn't trying to compete with mass-production restoration shops churning out predictable builds. He was selling a point of view. A car that came out of Counts Customs was supposed to look like nothing else on the road, and that philosophy is part of why the shop's early reputation spread so quickly by word of mouth alone, long before any cameras were involved. It's worth remembering that none of this happened overnight. Danny spent years building relationships with part suppliers, learning which craftsmen in the area could be trusted with delicate work, and slowly assembling a crew that shared his standards. Long before Counting Cars existed, he had already put in the unglamorous work of building a functioning business from scratch, securing steady clients, managing overhead, and surviving the kind of slow years that most small shops face before they find their footing. That groundwork mattered later, because it meant that when television opportunity eventually knocked, there was an actual business behind the brand, not just a personality in front of a camera. Danny's transition from a respected local shop owner to a national television personality came through an unlikely connection. Count's Customs happened to be located near the famous pawn shop featured on History Channel's hit series, Pawn Stars. Because of the shop's location and Danny's expertise, producers began bringing him in whenever the Pawn Stars crew needed a professional opinion on a car or motorcycle deal. Audiences responded well to his knowledge and blunt, likable personality, and it didn't take long for network executives to realize there was a bigger opportunity sitting right there. In 2012, that opportunity became Counting Cars, a spin-off built entirely around Danny, his crew, and the day-to-day operations of Count's Customs. The show followed a simple but effective formula. Take in a beat-up or forgotten vehicle, walk viewers through the restoration or customization process, and let the personalities in the shop carry the emotional weight of each episode. It worked. Rather than relying on manufactured conflict, the early seasons leaned into authentic passion for cars and genuine relationships between crew members, and audiences noticed the difference. By its third season, Counting Cars had firmly established itself as one of the more popular automotive shows on cable television. Millions of viewers tuned in regularly, drawn not just by the finished builds, but by the personalities behind them, the humor, the friendly rivalries, the pride each team member took in their craft. Danny had transformed from a niche Vegas television personality into a nationally recognized figure, and Count's Customs went from a working-class garage to a business with a fan base that stretched far beyond car enthusiasts. Part of what made the show resonate was how unforced it felt compared to other reality programs airing at the time. Viewers who had grown tired of manufactured feuds and staged confrontations on competing shows responded to a cast that seemed to genuinely enjoy working together. Early episodes leaned on the natural rhythm of a working garage, customers walking in with unusual requests, crew members debating the best approach to a tricky repair, and the satisfaction of watching a wrecked or forgotten vehicle roll out the door looking better than it had in decades. That authenticity became the show's calling card, and it's a large part of why the series managed to survive as long as it did in a crowded field of automotive programming. Success brought Danny new opportunities outside the shop as well. He expanded into the hospitality and entertainment world by opening a rock-themed bar and music venue in Las Vegas, giving him a way to combine his two lifelong passions, music and motorcycles, under one roof. He continued building custom vehicles, made public appearances, and kept the shop's momentum going. But as Counting Cars grew from a modest cable show into a genuine hit, the pressures that came with that success started to surface in ways viewers rarely saw. Reality television has a way of compressing time in a manner that doesn't reflect how work actually happens. On Counting Cars, viewers typically watch a car go from rough project to finished build within a single 30-minute episode. In reality, a serious restoration or custom build can take weeks, sometimes months, depending on parts availability, the complexity of the work, and how many setbacks the team runs into along the way. Rare parts have to be sourced, sometimes from out of state or overseas. Mechanical problems that seem simple on the surface often reveal deeper issues once a vehicle is taken apart. None of that translates neatly into a short television segment, so a massive amount of behind-the-scenes labor simply never makes it to air. Danny has always had a reputation for demanding high standards from his team, and that reputation is not just for the cameras. If a paint job doesn't meet his expectations, it gets redone. If an engine doesn't sound right, it gets rechecked before it's considered finished. That kind of perfectionism produces better cars, but it also adds pressure to a crew that's already working against production deadlines. Balancing genuine craftsmanship with the demands of a television schedule is not an easy combination, and over the years, that tension wore on different members of the team in different ways. The show's success also changed the day-to-day reality of working at Count's Customs in ways that had nothing to do with car restoration. What had once been a working garage became something closer to a tourist destination. Fans traveled from around the world hoping to see the shop in person, meet cast members, and take photos. While that kind of attention is flattering at first, it eventually became disruptive. Crew members trying to focus on delicate, detail-oriented work now had to do So while being watched, photographed, and occasionally interrupted by visitors who simply wanted a moment with the cast, fame also shifted the internal dynamics among the team itself. Cameras have a way of changing how people behave, and Counts Customs was no exception. Some employees became more comfortable with public attention than others, and disagreements over screen time, credit, and compensation started to create friction between coworkers who had once worked side by side, without any tension at all. Danny found himself managing not just the technical side of the business, but also the personalities, egos, and expectations that came with being on a nationally televised show. As the business expanded, new merchandise lines, the bar and grill, public appearances, and licensing opportunities, Danny's responsibilities multiplied well beyond running a custom car shop. Legal issues surfaced as well, including disputes with former employees over pay and working conditions, which added stress to an already demanding workload and pulled focus away from the shop floor. Contracts had to be formalized, image rights had to be protected, and employees who had once worked purely out of passion for cars now had to navigate the more corporate reality of being part of a media brand. There's also a simpler, less scandalous factor that reality television rarely accounts for: burnout. Working in a custom shop is physically demanding under normal circumstances: long hours, repetitive strain, exposure to fumes and chemicals, and the constant pressure of getting a job right the first time, because a customer's classic car isn't something you get to practice on twice. Add a film crew, a production schedule, and the expectation of staying camera-ready throughout, and it's easy to see how even people who genuinely loved the work could eventually reach a breaking point. Not every departure from Counts Customs needs a scandal to explain it. Sometimes the simple accumulation of stress is enough. Danny has spoken in general terms over the years about how difficult it can be to balance running an actual business with the demands of producing entertainment. A shop owner has to think about payroll, supplier relationships, and customer satisfaction. A television personality has to think about pacing, storylines, and keeping an audience engaged. Trying to do both jobs at once, season after season, inevitably creates friction, both with the production side of things and with the employees who suddenly found themselves working a very different job than the one they originally signed up for. By the show's third and fourth seasons, the crew looked noticeably different from where it had started. Some departures were quiet and undramatic. Others followed disputes, legal action, or accusations that never made it onto the show itself. Fans who followed the series closely began to notice the changing lineup, even without official explanations. Danny, for his part, has generally stayed focused on the craftsmanship side of the business rather than publicly airing the details of every departure. But over time, more information about several of these exits has come to light. Here are 5 of the most notable. Not every consequential figure at Counts Customs spent time in front of the cameras, and Joseph Frontiera is a clear example of that. Hired to handle the shop's accounting and financial operations, Frontiera wasn't a builder, painter, or mechanic. He was the person trusted with payroll, expenses, and the day-to-day money that kept the business running. For a while, that arrangement appeared to work exactly as intended. That changed when irregularities began showing up in the company's financial records. According to a lawsuit later filed by Counts Customs, an internal review uncovered a pattern of unauthorized spending traced back to Frontiera. The allegations were substantial. The lawsuit claimed he used company funds to cover a down payment on a personal Range Rover, paid for personal airline travel using business money, and failed to handle the company's tax obligations properly, which reportedly resulted in an IRS penalty of roughly $18,000. The lawsuit also alleged that signature stamps were created without authorization, allowing checks to be signed and processed without the knowledge of the shop's ownership. Once the allegations surfaced, Counts Customs pursued the matter through both civil and criminal channels. Court filings indicate Frontiera was criminally charged with felony theft in Las Vegas related to the misuse of funds. The shop's lawsuit didn't stop with Frontiera alone. It also named the staffing agency that had originally placed him in the role, arguing the agency failed to disclose a prior employment history that reportedly included previous embezzlement-related issues. That agency, in turn, pushed back against the claims, arguing there wasn't sufficient support for the allegations, and that its contract had never authorized Frontiera to handle cash or credit transactions in the first place. By the time the story became public, Frontiera had already been absent from the show for some time, with no on-screen explanation given for his disappearance. Once the lawsuit details became widely reported, the reason became clear. According to later court records, the criminal case against him was eventually resolved with a sentence of time served rather than an extended prison term. Frontiera has largely stayed out of the public eye since then, and there's little indication he has returned to any kind of high-profile role in the years since. For a business built on trust and reputation, having a financial employee accused of this kind of conduct was damaging in ways that went beyond the dollar amount involved. It also served as a wake-up call. In the aftermath, Counts Customs reportedly tightened its internal financial controls, aiming to prevent a similar situation from happening again. Frontiera never appeared on screen swinging a wrench or blending paint, but the fallout from his time at the shop left one of the most serious marks on the business's history. What makes this case stand out compared to the other names on this list is how thoroughly it played out in public court records rather than staying confined to rumor and speculation. Local news outlets in Las Vegas covered the lawsuit in detail, and the filings themselves laid out a fairly specific paper trail. The alleged use of business funds for a personal vehicle down payment, unauthorized travel expenses, and the creation of signature stamps that allowed checks to be processed without proper oversight. Because so much of it was documented in a civil complaint and a parallel criminal case, there's less ambiguity here than in some of the other departures on this list. The countersuit filed by the staffing agency that had placed Frontiera in the role adds another layer to the story. Rather than accepting responsibility, the agency argued that its arrangement with Counts Customs never should have allowed Frontiera access to cash or credit accounts in the first place, and that any failure to properly vet his background didn't change the terms of that agreement. Disputes like this are common in cases involving staffing placements, where liability can end up split between the company that hired the worker and the agency that placed them. For Counts Customs, pursuing both parties was likely as much about recovering losses as it was about sending a message that this kind of breach of trust would not go unanswered. For longtime fans of the series, Frontiera's case remains one of the clearest examples of how a business's public image and its private operations can diverge. On camera, Counts Customs was a tight-knit shop built on trust between co-workers. Behind the scenes, the person responsible for managing the company's money was allegedly exploiting exactly that trust for personal gain. It's a reminder that not every threat to a business comes from a competitor or a bad customer. Sometimes it comes from inside the office nobody ever sees on television.